All right, we'll be starting Mark chapter 7, the end of it, verse 31. I was looking through the questions this week, and I was reading some of them, going over them. I thought, man, I thought I did that one last week. So I looked back in my sheets that I put together, and sure enough, I put them on both of them. So sometimes these lessons, they like cut off in the middle of a chapter, just randomly in a chapter. But if you looked at the questions last week, we went ahead and finished out the chapter with them. So I guess the good news is last week I thought we didn't make it through all of it, but we actually did. So we're going to pick up here in verse 31 of Mark chapter 7. Before we do, question number 1 on your handout is the question, what do you think it would be like to be deaf or to be unable to speak? I know there's probably some wives in the audience tonight who think their husbands are deaf, and maybe there's some husbands in the audience who wish their wife couldn't speak at times. I don't know. So, but what do you think it'd be like to actually have that handicap?
Very frustrating.
Yeah, I think probably if you were born with it, you probably wouldn't know any different, would you? I mean, a lot of times people are born with handicaps that other people don't have, and to them it's just the way of life. I mean, it's just the way that they've always lived and the way that they've always known. Now, they of course know that it wouldn't be normal, but I think it would probably be a lot harder if somewhere along the lines you had hearing at one time and then you went deaf, because then you would know what it's actually like to be able to hear things. But it's something that those of us who are blessed with physical health just can't appreciate, I don't think, what it would be like. I was thinking about can you imagine not ever hearing running water or hearing birds or even, hearing a conversation that just normally takes place between us? The ability to speak, of course, that would be bad to lose that too. But what do you think it'd be like to lose both of those things at the same time?
Wouldn't be very good, would it?
I think that'd be a pretty severe handicap, wouldn't you? We're going to read about a man tonight who, of course, was deaf, and some people believe that he just had a speech impediment. That may be true because sometimes when people lose their hearing, it does affect their speech just because they're not able to hear their voice anymore. So they lose some of their distinctness to their letters. They lose the ability to clearly pronounce words that they once knew. But certainly it would be a handicap either way. So in Mark chapter 7, that's what we read about beginning in verse 31. Jesus heals a deaf and a mute man, or a man with a speech impediment. And as you read about Jesus here, what attitude did the people have toward Christ? And specifically as you look at verse 32, what did they want Jesus to do?
Lay his hands on him.
Yeah, they basically want him to help, didn't they? And you see this developing sense and identity of Jesus in the eyes of many of the people. And some people begin when they first thought about Jesus, they were pretty skeptical, weren't they? They went, they've investigated, and now they some of them at least are identifying him as somebody who can genuinely help other people, and not like just with everyday problems, but with extraordinary disabilities and extraordinary diseases that doctors can't do anything about, and people, there's just no physical cure for them. And so the people are beginning to pick up and to identify Jesus as this person who's able to help with problems beyond the realm of humanity and even physical medicine. And as you read about Jesus healing this man, he did it in a very peculiar way. How did he heal this man?
First of all, he took him aside.
Okay. That's kind of interesting, and a couple of these guys we're to read about tonight, Jesus kind of took them, away from everybody else. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, he follows it up and says that he wants them not to publish it. So I guess that would be a good way, he thinks, to take them aside
Yeah.
not embarrass maybe them, or he seem like he's proud of the fact that look what I'm doing.
Okay.
I think it's so he could function. Because once word got out he was there and healing blind and deaf people, everybody shows up, you can't even move.
Yeah. And one of the stories we're going to read about tonight, of course, is there's at least 4,000 people, that are following Jesus Christ. So there's a tremendous number of people. Bible doesn't really specify exactly why he did it. I think all of those are legitimate reasons, though. You think about Christ, and right now it's pretty clear he doesn't want his identity well known. He's revealing himself to people here and there, but a lot of times when he heals these people, he tells them, don't say anything. Don't go back and don't tell anybody about this and things along those lines. And then, of course, Adam brought up the idea of all the people. Imagine trying to function, and imagine trying to do something one-on-one with somebody when you're surrounded by thousands of people and they're trying to get in and they're trying to get you to listen to them and to do things for them. And I think all those are legitimate reasons. But he does take him aside, and what does he do specifically?
Puts his fingers in his ears and spits and touches his tongue.
Okay.
It's a little bit weird.
So think about if you're this deaf guy and you can't speak, can't hear, and Jesus takes you aside. He sticks his fingers in your ears. He spits. He touches your tongue, and then he looks up to heaven, and all of a sudden you can hear and you can speak. Why do you think Jesus did it in that manner? Just curiosity. I always like to think or hear what everybody else thinks about it.
That particular,
Yeah.
to show his power, to show who he is as Son of God.
Yeah, and you think about it, I think about it too, sometimes he just spoke the words, didn't he? And healed people, but this guy can't hear. So how's he going to know that Jesus is the one who healed him? I think this is a way of kind of showing him, I'm the one who's doing this. I'm the cause of this, and I'm the one who's going to heal you and who's going to help you. But you think about Christ, one of the main characteristics of Jesus' traveling about was his compassion. And when he saw somebody that needed help and he could help them, he always did. And that's a tremendous lesson for us. We have all kinds of opportunities that probably pass before us on a daily basis. But when we see somebody in need and we have the ability to help them, we need to imitate Jesus and do whatever we can for them. So these people have this attitude that Jesus can help him, and Jesus did. He healed them of these physical infirmities. And then whenever he heals the man, he gives him a command. What command is that? Don't tell anybody, right? And the King James Version there in, what verse are we in here, I think? Yeah, verse 36, it says he charged him. New King James says he commanded him. It's kind of interesting. I took a little bit of time and looked up this word. I always tell you guys, I've got lots of time to do that, unlike everybody else. So every once in a while I go on a tangent and I think, that might be an interesting word to look at. And I look it up. Generally, it turns out about every word you look at is an interesting word. But this word is indeed the idea of a command or an order. Something like a superior, soldier would give. And it's interesting when you look at it in the original language, though, it's not the ordinary word that's translated as command throughout the New Testament. And what commentators say, and what, if you look up in the Greek lexicons a little bit, they say that this word is a word that's even stronger than the idea of a command or an order. And if you look at the way it's used throughout the New Testament, most of the time, it's used by Jesus himself when he's telling somebody, don't tell anybody about this. Or don't tell anybody who I am. There's only 2 other times that it's used in the Bible outside of the words of Jesus. Once is in Acts chapter 15. Remember when some Jews pretended to be sent out by the church at Jerusalem and went about teaching the people that they had to keep the law of Moses in order to be saved. But the statement is made there by the elders and by Peter. We gave them no such command. That's the same word. In other words, the idea is we didn't give them anything like that. We didn't give them any orders. We didn't tell them to say anything. We didn't teach anything along those lines. The second place that it's used is in Hebrews chapter 12, when Paul being the Hebrew writer, when he's writing about the law of Moses when it was received on Mount Sinai, and the people were commanded not to touch the mountain. And so again, it's kind of interesting. It's not the ordinary word. Anything that I read up on it said it's even stronger than the idea of just a command or an order. It's like an emphatic, do not, absolutely do not tell anybody. Yeah, so that's the next question, isn't it? Question number 3. How did that command work?
Are we different though? If a strange man walked up and healed you or your wife or your son or your daughter of an incurable disease, you know what I'm saying? Would you go hard and not in a bad way, just out of excitement?
Yeah.
Look what happened,
I mean, what would you tell people when they ask you what happened? It'd be kind of hard to explain it, wouldn't it? And when they say, well, who did this? I can't tell you. As a human, and especially like Adam pointed out, you're talking about people with incurable sicknesses, diseases, handicaps. And somebody comes along and heals you, and then you can't tell anybody about them. That'd be a hard thing to do. But I also want to stress, Jesus said don't do it. He said don't tell anybody about this, or don't tell anybody who I am. Steve, you got a comment?
Well, the 2 times he killed people that seemed like it impressed people most was this guy and the white guy. And he's running around healing everybody, raising people from the dead. And why this guy and the white guy? And I just think about it. Everybody knew these people. Everybody knew that guy was on the roof. Or everybody knew this guy couldn't hear. But that still doesn't make really good sense to me.
Yeah.
That seems to be the way it was, and it seems to be the way I know it was going. But it's,
Yeah, and I think it had to do. Of course, Jesus knew they'd go tell everybody too, But I think it had to do with God's timeline. God had this order that things had to happen. You didn't want Jesus getting famous too quickly, and people coming trying to kill him too soon. That just means more work for God. But I think personally, I think that's the reasoning behind it. Danny, do you have a comment next?
Yeah, there were 35, verse 35, it talks about how his ears were open, and the string when his tongue was loosed, and he spake plain.
Yeah.
And then Jesus, in 36, he charged them, it says, that they should tell no man. Was this just bystanders, you think, around, or did?
Well, I think if you look back in verse 32, it says, then they brought to him one who was deaf and had a speech impediment. And generally what you find is, a group of friends bring these people to Jesus. So I think they were probably present too with him. I think they probably went aside whenever he took him outside of the city, but obviously not everybody was.
So the first words that this deaf man heard was, don't tell anybody.
Well, I don't know. That's a good question. He started talking at least before Jesus said that in verse 35, so maybe they had a conversation before he told him that.
Conversely, it seems odd to me that back in chapter 6, if you remember, he leaves Nazareth because nobody believed he could. It says he didn't do many miracles, or let's say he couldn't, because they didn't of their unbelief. So how does it spread
Yeah.
And because of their unbelief, these people already believe it.
Yeah, and I think part of it is too, you know, the more famous Jesus gets, the more people come. You know, and he's got this mission that he's trying to accomplish, and he's trying to train his apostles too, you know, for this 3-year period. So I think, you know, the more people you get, the harder it's going to be for Jesus to operate and do what he wants to do. But generally, yeah. And even when you, like you mentioned, when you go back to Mark chapter 5, the demon-possessed boy, you know, Jesus told him, he said, go home and tell everybody. But the difference was nobody believed him. Nobody believed in Jesus in that area. And so he told them, you go and tell everybody what I did and about what I did. So maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's the difference between them.
What bothers me about this is that Jesus healed me, and he said, now don't you tell nobody, and you've seen his power. When you keep your mouth shut, you know, I have trouble, but I think if he told me not to do it, I would be afraid that he'd do something to me, something else.
Well,
Take it away.
yeah, I don't know.
I don't understand why they haven't told everybody.
Yeah, well, I can understand in a sense, and like you said, I can't too. But you know, think about the idea. When Jesus healed them, they couldn't keep quiet about it because they had to tell somebody. What about us today? You know, Jesus heals us spiritually, doesn't he? Are we like them? Can we not keep our mouths shut? Do we have to tell people about what he's done? Or are we people who, you know, don't want to say anything to anybody about it? Go ahead, sir. Do you have a comment?
Well, I just think of the difference between physical infirmity and spiritual, like the demons that you mentioned there. His power over the demons, I would think that he would definitely want that. But the power to heal everybody with a problem, that's really going to take away from his ministry here, because his ministry, I think, or I feel like anyway, was on here with spiritual people, the spiritual side of it. He was thinking spiritually instead of physically.
Yeah.
And so, that's,
Well, sadly, spiritually speaking, we're quieter about that than we would be if we were
Amen.
physically healed and seeing something.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. 100%.
Wasn't the whole point of miracles, though, to prove he was who he said he was?
Yeah, it was to create belief, wasn't it? That was the reason he did it. But like was pointed out, these are kind of interesting because he actually separates the people themselves from the thousands that are, you know, already following him. So I don't know, a lot of good thoughts and questions. Of course, I can't answer most of them, but it always is interesting to kind of mold some of those things over. Okay, so we got to move a little bit here. Let's go down to Jesus feeding the 4,000. Just want to remind you, there's, of course, a previous incident that takes place where Jesus feeds the 5,000. So 2 of them that takes place in the ministry of Jesus. Question number 4, you read that story there in Mark chapter 8. Why couldn't Jesus just send the people home for food? Now, he has this great crowd, thousands of people that are following him. Why does he perform a miracle and feed them? Why doesn't he just say, go home and get something to eat? Yeah, how long had they been with him? It's been 3 days that they've been with him. And probably at this point, you know, they had probably brought some provisions and some food with them. And imagine and so now Jesus said, I can't just send them home because they don't have anything to eat. And so they're going to get worn out and weary on the way, and they're going to faint, you know, and fall by the wayside. So we need to feed them before we dismiss them and send them home. Think about this crowd. You know, think about the craving that they had to follow Jesus, to hear him teach, to see the miracles that he performed. For 3 days, they devoted themselves to just solely following we have limited resources, don't we? You know, you're talking about feeding 4,000 people here, and obviously they've already eaten a lot of the food. There's not very much left. And so, in their eyes, we just don't, you know, it's good work, but we just don't have enough resources to carry out this work. You look at Jesus, and again, you see the compassion of Christ. Jesus is always looking at people. He's always studying people. He's always observing them very closely. And of course, that leads to him seeing something in their life that they need. And that seeing that need then creates compassion within the heart or the mind of Jesus. Good lesson for us, because how are we going to know that somebody has a need? How do you figure out somebody needs something?
We have to see it.
You got to be looking, don't you? You got to be studying. You got to be observing. You got to be looking for it. When you see they have a need, we should have compassion, shouldn't we? And if we have the resources, we should help whatever we can in providing that need. And again, that's just the operation of Jesus here throughout these stories. So the disciples see the need. I don't know how much compassion they really had on this crowd. That's kind of an interesting study too, because they were probably mainly Gentiles. But they, of course, said, we don't have enough resources to do what you want us to do. Sometimes as Christians, you ever been in that situation before? Probably all of us have. I mean, there's so many needs in the world today, and we look at ourselves as an individual and we say, man, I just can't supply all the needs. I have limited resources, don't have enough to help everybody out. And of course, I think one of the things that we can learn from this lesson is God doesn't expect us to use something we don't have, does he? What did they use? What did Jesus use to feed these people? What the people had. Not what they didn't have, but what they did. And so we can only use what we have, and of course that's all God expects us to do. See what we can do with what we have. And of course there were people who were willing and able to do that. So Jesus ends up feeding all this tremendous crowd of 4,000 people. Now after that happens, question number 6, who comes to see Jesus? The Pharisees, and in Matthew's account, Matthew chapter 16, he includes the idea that the Sadducees also come along. And why did the Pharisees and the Sadducees come to see Jesus? What they want?
They want a sign.
They wanted a sign, right? Were there plenty of signs to be seen that Jesus was the Messiah? Yeah, there were signs all over the place. And did everybody have trouble seeing that Jesus was the Christ? You say everybody? No. Some people saw it very quickly, didn't they? So what was the difference between some people being to see so easily that Jesus was the Messiah, and other people saying, we don't have enough evidence, we need a sign? It really has to do with motive, doesn't it? I mean, why did they come to Jesus and ask him for a sign? What does it say there?
It's empty.
Were they looking for truth? Did they come to Jesus with their eyes wide open? No. They had an ulterior motive in their hearts, didn't they? And that was to get Jesus to do something that violated the law, or to say something, or to teach something that violated the law. And so they were not open, they were not honest individuals. And of course, Jesus knows there's no excuse for their spiritual blindness. He said, you guys are looking for a sign, you're not going to get it. Well, they got plenty of signs. I mean, if they couldn't see those signs, Jesus wasn't going to give them another sign, because it wouldn't have done anything, wouldn't have changed them anyway. So you see that group of people who are spiritually blind to who Jesus is. Jesus and his disciples get in a boat. They start going to the other side of the sea, and Jesus starts talking to them about the leaven of the Pharisees and Herod. And question number 7 here, why do the disciples misunderstand what Jesus said? Yeah, their minds were on the physical, weren't they? And they get in this boat and they start traveling, and they get hungry, and they think, man, we forgot to bring any food. We only got one loaf of bread here. And Jesus sees this as an opportunity to teach them, and so he says, you got to be careful about the leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. And so in their minds, they're thinking, is it because we just brought one loaf of bread? Is that what, is Jesus chastising us or reprimanding us for not bringing enough food? Is that what the point that he's trying to get across? You look at these two different groups of people. Of course, the Pharisees, they were famous for adding to the law of God, adding all these commandments and these outward shows. They were hypocrites. They were play actors, Jesus said. So, sometimes people, when they see other people who do things that aren't commanded by God, to kind of show other people how religious and how devoted they are, does that impress people? Would people listen to other people because of that?
People follow them.
Yeah, they have followers, don't they? They're all over the world today. What about people who are acting as their Christian? Does that influence other people? Yeah, they look at them and say, they're a good person. They're religious minded. And so Jesus said, you got to be careful about the Pharisees. Don't let them influence you. Don't let their outward show trick you like leaven influences dough. He also talks about the Herodians. Of course, the Herodians were a political group. Generally speaking, when you think about political leaders, where's their main focus and concern?
Retaining power.
Yeah, it's generally going to be on earthly things, isn't it? Material things. That's where all their focus and their time is spent. And can political leaders influence people in the world today? Yeah. Got to be careful that they don't turn us into material or worldly, physically minded thinking, right? Got to remain spiritually minded. So Jesus was warning them about those two things. So how does Jesus try to explain this to them? How does he try to get the lesson across?
You just seen what happened, how many baskets, how much waste was there.
Yeah. He said, think about what you just seen. How can you think that I'm worried about a loaf of bread? You've just seen me feed thousands of people. And how many baskets did we take up? How many loaves were left, or how many baskets were left after I fed the 5,000? How many loaves did we take up after I fed the 4,000? It's the idea, and we're just like them. Sometimes we just are so physically minded that we miss the spiritual lesson, or we miss the whole point of what Jesus says. But the whole point is Jesus is the bread of life. He fed these people physically, but he was also feeding them spiritually too. And, to think that he fed, again, specifically 9,000 people with bread, probably more like 18 to 27,000 because women and children weren't included in that number. To think that he's worried about a loaf of bread. Jesus said, think about who I am and think about, what you saw. So question number 9 is this. Have you ever misunderstood a biblical topic?
Yes.
I think we probably, if we're honest, I think probably all of us would say, yeah. And here's the question, why do we sometimes misunderstand biblical topics or ideas or teachings? What are the reasons? Preconceived ideas. Yeah. What else? Traditions. Okay. Anything else?
Taking out of context.
Yeah. How about being spiritually blind, just like the Pharisees? We got it in our mind, this is the way it is, and that's the way we approach the Scripture and approach Jesus' teaching. But all those things, ignorance, forgetfulness, sometimes if we're overly concerned with material things, can we miss the spiritual lessons? Yeah. We're just like them. So the bad news is we didn't make it through it tonight, but if you go ahead and read, you'll read about Jesus healing a blind man at Bethsaida. Interestingly enough, Jesus told him, don't go back to Bethsaida. Read a little bit, study a little bit about Bethsaida. These were people who just didn't believe Jesus either. So Jesus uses all this to draw a confession from Peter about who he thought Jesus was. And of course, Peter makes the great confession there. You know, what we say and believe about Jesus is important, isn't it? It's a matter of life and death. But he again warns his disciples, don't tell anybody else. Don't share this information with other people. And then he ends up predicting his death. And of course, Peter took exception to that. And Jesus, once again, is trying to get rid of this spiritual blindness in the eyes of people. Peter had this preconceived idea of who the Messiah was and what he was going to do. And what Jesus was telling him didn't fit with it. And so he said, there's no way you're going to die on the cross, and there's no way we're going to let people put you to death. But Jesus pointed out, listen, you're not thinking right, you know. Sometimes I think it's human nature too when we read the Bible to accept the positive things and reject the negative, don't you? I think that's just human nature. And so Peter wanted him to be the Messiah, but he didn't want him to die. And then Jesus makes a statement in Mark 9:1 about standing there who would not die till they saw the kingdom of God come with power. What does that mean? What was that about? It's the coming of the church, right? Peter made that great confession. You go back to Matthew's account. Matthew includes Jesus saying to Peter, you know, you're Peter, and upon this rock I'll build my church. And so Jesus said, some people are standing here this very day who will not die until they see me build my.